The afternoon sun was bright and warm, shining down on the busy city streets. It was one of those perfect Saturdays where the air felt fresh, and everyone seemed to be out enjoying their day. For a mother named Alina and her 9-year-old son James, this day was even more special. They weren't just running errands. They were on a mission to celebrate a huge victory. James held his mother's hand tightly as they walked toward the large shopping mall in the center of the city. In his other hand, he clutched a shiny blue ribbon. It was a first-place ribbon from his school's science fair. Just a few days ago, James had stood in front of his whole class and explained his project about how volcanoes work. He had been nervous, very nervous, but he did it. For a child who struggled with daily challenges, standing up there and speaking clearly was a massive achievement. Alina looked down at her son and felt her heart swell with pride. She knew how hard James worked every single day. Since he was a small boy, James had lived with Tourette syndrome. It was a condition that made his body do things he didn't want it to do. Sometimes he would jerk his shoulders. Other times he would make sudden noises with his throat. These were called tics, and they were like uninvited guests that showed up at the worst times. But today, the tics were quiet. The excitement of winning the science fair seemed to be keeping them at bay, but Alina knew that could change any minute. She walked with a protective stance, keeping close to him, ready to step in if the world became too loud or too judgmental. "Are you ready, buddy?" Alina asked softly, squeezing his hand. James looked up, his eyes shining behind his glasses. "Yes, Mom. Are you sure we can afford it?" he asked, his voice laced with that typical childhood worry about money. Alina smiled warmly. "We saved up for this. You worked so hard. You deserve something special, something you can keep forever to remember this day." They weren't going to a toy store, and they weren't going to a video game shop. Alina had promised him a piece of real jewelry. It was a big boy gift, something that would make him feel grown up and important. She wanted him to have a physical reminder of his strength, a trophy he could wear that wasn't just a ribbon. As they entered the mall, the atmosphere changed instantly. The cool air conditioning washed over them, replacing the warm breeze outside. The mall was crowded, filled with the smell of pretzels and coffee, and the sound of hundreds of footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. For most people, this was just background noise. But for James, it was a lot to process. He flinched slightly when a loud laugh burst out from a group of teenagers walking by. His left hand twitched a little, a small tick popping up like a bubble. Alina noticed it immediately, but didn't make a big deal. She just moved him slightly to the side, away from the loudest part of the crowd. "It's okay," she whispered. More to herself than to him, they made their way past the clothing stores and the food court, heading for the more expensive part of the mall. This was the section with the marble floors and the glass display cases that sparkled under bright lights. Alina felt a bit nervous herself. She wasn't used to these kinds of places. She usually shopped for practical things, sales and discounts. But for James, she would walk into the fanciest store in the city if it meant seeing him smile. Finally, they arrived in front of the jewelry store. The sign was elegant gold lettering against a black background. Through the large, clean windows, they could see rows of necklaces and watches sitting on velvet stands. Alina took a deep breath and looked at James. "Here we are. Remember, look with your eyes, not your hands, until we ask for help." James nodded seriously. He straightened his shirt and tried to stand up tall, mimicking the way he saw grown-ups stand. "I'm ready," he said, though there was a tremor of nervousness in his voice. They walked to the glass door, and Alina pulled it open. A little bell chimed above them. Instantly, the noise of the mall faded away. The jewelry store was incredibly quiet. It smelled like lemon polish and expensive perfume. The lighting was soft and focused on the glass cases, making the diamonds and silver glitter like stars. It felt like a different world in here. It was so quiet that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the soft padding of feet on the thick carpet. Alina felt the eyes of the staff turn toward them. There were 2 women working behind the long counter. They were dressed in sharp black suits, and they looked perfect, their hair done neatly and their makeup precise. At first, they just looked. Then, one of the women, who had a name tag that said manager, looked at James's shoes, then up to his messy hair, and then at Alina. Her expression wasn't exactly rude, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was that look all mothers of children who are different know too well, the look that asks, asterisk, do you belong here? Asterisk. Alina ignored it. She squeezed James's hand and walked further in. Let's look at the necklaces over there. She pointed to a glass case on the left. James's eyes went wide. Inside the case, there were silver chains of all thicknesses. Some had tiny hearts, some had crosses, and others had geometric shapes. The light reflecting off the glass danced across James's face. He was mesmerized. As they stopped in front of the case, the quiet of the room seemed to get louder. The pressure to be silent made James anxious. Whenever he felt pressure, like when he had to take a test at school or when he had to sit still in a library, his tics would get worse to release the tension building up inside him. His shoulder jerked sharply. Thump. It was a hard tick hitting his shoulder against his body. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet store, even though it wasn't actually that loud. One of the staff members, a tall woman with sharp features, looked over from the register. She didn't say anything yet, but her eyes narrowed. Alina put a hand on James's back, rubbing it gently in circles. It was a signal they had practiced for years. It meant, I'm here. Breathe. It's okay. James took a shaky breath. He tried to focus on the silver pendants. He pointed at a small compass made of silver. That one, he whispered to his mom. It points the way. Alina leaned down to look. It's beautiful, James. Just like you. She signaled for the staff member to come over. The tall woman walked slowly. She didn't smile. Her heels clicked on the floor, a sharp, rhythmic sound that seemed to make James even more tense. Can we see the compass pendant, please? Alina asked, her voice polite but firm. The woman unlocked the case with a small key. As she reached in to get the necklace, she didn't look at Alina. She looked straight at James. James felt her gaze on him like a spotlight. He felt a tickle in his throat. He tried to swallow it down. He tried to clench his fists to stop the feeling. But it was like trying to hold back a sneeze. The woman placed the black velvet tray on the glass counter. As she pulled her hand back, James couldn't hold it in any longer. Click-clack, a sharp, loud vocal tick burst from his throat. His head jerked quickly to the side, his chin hitting his shoulder. The sound rang out in the silent shop. The woman behind the counter froze. She looked at James as if he had just shouted a curse word. The manager, who was organizing watches at the other end of the counter, stopped what she was doing and turned around slowly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alina's stomach tightened. She knew this moment. It was the moment before the storm. She put her arm around James's shoulders, pulling him into a side hug. I'm sorry, she said quickly to the saleswoman. He has Tourette's. He can't help it. She expected understanding. She expected a nod, or at least professional indifference. But the woman didn't give her that. The woman pulled the velvet tray back slightly, away from James, as if the noise might contaminate the jewelry. Please, the woman said, her voice cold and clipped. He needs to be quiet. This is a quiet store. James looked down at his shoes, his face turning red. The shame washed over him, hot and heavy. He tried to apologize, to say he was sorry. But the stress only made the ticks worse. Tick, tick, click. The sounds came again, rapid fire. The woman let out a loud, annoyed sigh. And that was when the manager began to walk toward them with a look that promised trouble. Alina took a deep breath, preparing to defend her son against the world, not knowing that help was closer than she could have ever imagined. The silence that followed James's vocal tick was heavy and suffocating, like a thick blanket dropped over the room. The sharp woman behind the counter didn't even try to hide her disgust. She pulled her hand back as if James had reached out to bite her, her eyes narrowing into thin slits. She looked down her nose at them, a look that screamed judgment. Madame, the woman said, her voice cutting through the quiet air like a knife. She didn't speak softly. She spoke loudly, wanting to make sure everyone heard her displeasure. You need to control him. This is a place of business. We have valuable items here, and his behavior is unacceptable. Alina felt a familiar hot flash of anger rise in her chest, but she pushed it down. She knew that getting angry wouldn't help James. It would only make his tics worse. She had learned over the years that kindness and patience were her best weapons, even when she wanted to scream. "I understand it can be surprising," Alina said, her voice trembling slightly but staying steady. "But James has Tourette syndrome. The noises you hear are tics. They are involuntary. He can't just stop them. He isn't doing it on purpose." The woman didn't seem to care about the medical explanation. She let out a loud, exaggerated huff and picked up a soft cloth, aggressively wiping the glass counter where James had been standing, as if his very presence had left dirt behind. "Well, it is very distracting," she snapped, not looking at Alina, but staring daggers at James. "He is disturbing the peace. Other customers are trying to shop. They don't want to listen to that." James felt his face burning hotter. He could feel the eyes of the room turning toward him. There was an older couple looking at wedding bands near the window. They stopped what they were doing and stared. A younger woman looking at earrings glanced over with a look of pity mixed with annoyance. It felt like a spotlight was shining right on him, exposing his biggest insecurity to the world. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Stop it," he told himself. "Just stop." He clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white. He held his breath, trying to freeze his muscles in place. But Tourette's doesn't work that way. The harder he tried to push the tics down, the more pressure built up inside him. Like a shaken soda bottle with the cap screwed on too tight, the stress of the moment was a trigger. Suddenly, his shoulder jerked violently again, hitting his ear. Then came a throat-clearing sound, loud and harsh, like a bark. The saleswoman recoiled physically, stepping back 2 steps. "That is it," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in the air. "I am dealing with a headache, and I will not tolerate this." Just as the woman was about to say something else, a door marked "Staff" only opened at the back of the store. A man in a dark suit walked out. He was older, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He was the store manager. He walked with an air of importance, checking his watch, clearly annoyed that he had been called away from his office. "What is going on out here?" the manager demanded, his voice booming. He looked at the saleswoman, then at Alina and James. Heard shouting. "We have a standard to maintain here." Saleswoman pointed a manicured finger at James. "This woman and her son are causing a scene, sir. The boy is making strange noises and jerking around. It's unsettling the other customers. I asked them to keep him quiet, but they won't do anything." Lena stepped forward. Putting herself slightly in front of James, she was shaking now. Not out of fear, but out of a fierce need to protect her child. "Sir, your sales associate is being rude. I tried to explain that my son has a disability. He is not doing this on purpose. We are here to buy something, not to cause trouble." The manager looked at James. He didn't see a 9-year-old boy who had just won a science fair. He didn't see a kid who was struggling and scared. He saw a problem. He saw something that didn't fit into his perfect, quiet, expensive showroom. "I don't care about the medical details," the manager said coldly. He folded his arms across his chest, making himself look bigger and more intimidating. "This is a luxury establishment. People come here for an experience of peace and elegance. Your son's shouting and erratic movements are ruining that experience. He can't help it." Elena's voice cracked. The tears were threatening to spill over now. "He is a child. You cannot ban a child for a disability." "I am not banning him," the manager said, his tone dismissive and arrogant. "But I am asking you to leave. Right now. You are disturbing the peace of my store. If you cannot control your child, then you should not bring him into a public place like this." The words hit James like a physical blow. "If you cannot control your child?" He heard the whispers of the other customers. The couple by the window shook their heads and walked out, as if being near them was contagious. The younger woman turned her back completely. James felt a lump form in his throat, big and hard. He looked up at his mother, seeing the glistening tears in her eyes. He felt like a burden. He felt like everything bad that was happening was his fault. He wished he could melt into the floor, disappear through the cracks, and cease to exist. He just wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. "We are not leaving," Alina said, her voice gaining strength. She wasn't going to let them win. "We have as much right to be here as anyone else. We have money to spend. We are customers." The manager laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Madam, look around you. Do you think you fit in here? This is not a place for screaming children." He took a step closer, invading their personal space. "I am asking you one last time. Leave before I call security to remove you." The threat of security hung in the air. It was humiliating. James couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the anger, the sadness, it all bubbled up inside him. He let out a loud, frustrated groan, a complex vocal tic that sounded half like a word and half like a sob. At the same time, his arm flew out, knocking against a small display of business cards on the counter. They fluttered to the floor like snow. The manager stared at the fallen cards. His face turned purple with rage. He slammed his hand down on the counter, making a loud bang that made James jump. "That is it," the manager shouted, losing his cool completely. "Get out. Get out of my store now. You are violent and disruptive. You are banned. Stop it." Alina yelled back, her voice echoing in the glass room. "Stop yelling at him. He is a little boy. Get out." The manager roared, pointing a shaking finger toward the glass door. He looked past them, his eyes scanning the mall walkway outside, looking for security guards. "I will not have this circus in my shop." James was trembling all over. He couldn't stop the tics now. They were coming in a rapid stream, jerks, clicks, sniffles. He had lost all control. He felt trapped. He looked at the door, wanting to run, but his legs felt like lead. He looked at his mom, who was crying openly now, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Just then, saleswoman muttered something under her breath, just loud enough for James to hear. "Animals," she whispered. "Bringing an animal into a nice place." The word echoed in James's mind. "Animal." Alina heard it too. She turned on the woman. "How dare you?" "Apologize to him." "I will do no such thing," the woman sniffed. Turning her back on them, the manager stepped forward, grabbing a phone from his pocket. "I am calling mall security. You have 30 seconds to get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." The situation had gone from bad to a nightmare. They were surrounded by glass and diamonds, but the atmosphere was ugly and cruel. James felt like the walls were closing in. He looked at his mother, his heart breaking because he was the cause of her pain. He didn't care about the necklace anymore. He didn't care about the science fair ribbon. He just wanted to be gone. He tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Let's go. Please, let's just go." Lena looked down at her son's terrified face. She saw the defeat in his eyes. It broke her heart, but she knew he was right. Staying here any longer would only hurt him more. Fighting these people wasn't worth his mental health. "Fine," Alina spat at the manager, wiping her tears. "You win. We are leaving. But trust me, everyone is going to hear about how you treat a 9-year-old boy." "I don't care what you say," the manager said smugly, putting the phone to his ear. "Just go." Lena grabbed James's hand, holding it tight enough to let him know she was there, but loose enough not to hurt him. She turned to lead him to the door, her head held high. Even though she was crying inside, James walked toward the exit, his head hung low. He couldn't look at anyone. He just wanted to be invisible. He reached for the door handle, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grip the metal. But before his fingers could touch the cool metal of the handle, the heavy glass door behind him swung open. The little bell above the door chimed, cutting through the heavy tension of the room. A soft whoosh of air from the mall entered the store, bringing with it the sounds of live music, chatter, and laughter. Alina and James both froze. They didn't turn around immediately. They were too focused on escaping. But the manager and the saleswoman looked toward the new arrival. The manager lowered his phone, his expression shifting from rage to confusion, then to a flicker of recognition. The rude saleswoman's mouth fell open slightly. A tall figure in a dark leather jacket and blue jeans walked in. He had a day's worth of stubble on his face and messy hair that looked like he had just run his hands through it. He was carrying a James stared at the hand extended toward him. It was a large hand, rough and calloused, with knuckles that looked like they had seen a few scrapes over the years. It wasn't the manicured soft hand of the jewelry saleswoman. It was a real hand. James's own hand was shaking, his fingers twitching with the nervous energy that had been building up inside him. He wanted to reach out and shake it, but a sudden, violent tick made his arm jerk backward, pulling his hand away. He flinched, waiting for the reaction. He was used to people pulling away, used to looks of annoyance or even disgust when his body did something unexpected. He braced himself for Keanu to stand up and walk away or to make a face. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't pull his hand back. He didn't even blink. He simply stayed there, crouched down on one knee, holding his hand out steady and calm. He looked at James with a patience that seemed to slow down time. "Take your time," Keanu said softly. His voice was so low and quiet that it felt like a secret just between the two of them. "I'm not going anywhere." James took a shaky breath. He looked at his mother, whose eyes were wide with disbelief and relief. She gave him a tiny nod. Slowly, James reached out again. His fingers trembled, and just as they brushed against Keanu's palm, shoulder gave a sharp twitch. Keanu gently closed his fingers around James's hand, griping it firmly to stop the shaking. He didn't squeeze too hard, just enough to ground the boy, to let him know that he was safe. He held the handshake for a moment longer than normal, looking James right in the eyes. "Nice to meet you, James," Keanu said with a small, genuine smile. "I'm Keanu," the manager, who had been standing there with his mouth open, suddenly seemed to remember that he was the boss. He cleared his throat loudly, trying to assert his authority over the situation. He didn't like being ignored. He stepped forward, puffing out his chest, and waved a hand dismissively toward the door. "Sir, excuse me," the manager said, his voice blustering and filled with fake importance. "I don't know who you are, and I don't care. This is a private situation. We are dealing with a security issue here. These people are being asked to leave. I must ask you to step aside so we can handle this." The saleswoman chimed in from behind the counter, her voice sharp and whiny. "Yes, sir." The boy was screaming and knocking things over. He was aggressive. "We can't have that kind of behavior in here." Keanu didn't stand up immediately. He didn't even look at them. He kept his eyes on James for another second, giving the boy a reassuring wink. Then slowly he stood up to his full height. He was a tall man, and when he straightened his spine, he seemed to fill the entire room. The leather jacket he wore creaked softly. He turned to face the manager, and his expression changed completely. The warmth he had shown James vanished, replaced by a look of cool, hard steel. The manager took an involuntary step backward. Up close, he recognized the face now. Everyone in the city knew that face. But it wasn't the fame that made the manager nervous. It was the way Keanu was looking at him. It was the look of someone who was absolutely disgusted by what he was seeing. "Aggressive?" Keanu asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the manager's face turn pale. "You call a 9-year-old boy aggressive? He was disrupting the store?" The manager insisted, though his voice lacked the confidence it had just moments ago. "He was making those noises." And he lunged at the display. "He has Tourette's syndrome," Elena spoke up, her voice stronger now that she wasn't alone. "He was having a tic. He didn't lunge at anything. And he was winning a science fair today before you decided to ruin it." Keanu glanced back at Elena and gave her a nod of respect. Then he turned his laser focus back to the manager. "Tourette's," Keanu said slowly, as if testing the word. "Right. So a child with a medical condition walks into your store to spend money. Your reaction is to scream at him, call him names, and threaten to call the police. Is that the luxury experience you offer?" The manager sputtered, his face turning a shade of beet red. "We have standards. We have a reputation." "Customers don't want to hear I'm a customer," Keanu interrupted him. He crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm in here. And I didn't hear anything worth getting upset about. I just saw a scared kid and a bully in a suit." The silence that followed was absolute. The saleswoman behind the counter gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. A few customers who had been pretending to look at watches nearby stopped entirely to watch the scene unfold. The power in the room had shifted so suddenly it was dizzying. The manager was no longer the one in control. He was the one on trial. Keanu continued, taking a step closer to the manager. He didn't shout, but his presence was intimidating. "You were about to throw this young man out? But I think we were in the middle of looking at something. Weren't we, James?" Keanu turned back to James, his face softening again in an instant. It was a remarkable transformation from a defender blocking a blow to a friend asking a question. "You were looking at something specific before all the yelling started. Do you remember what it was?" James blinked, feeling a little dazed. He looked at the glass case where the compass necklace sat. He was still terrified of the manager and the saleswoman. But Keanu was standing right there, a solid wall of protection between them.
Ow.
"The compass," James whispered. He tried to point, but his finger twitched. "The silver one. It points the way." Keanu followed James's gaze to the necklace inside the case. He nodded his head slowly. "A compass. That's a good choice. Everyone needs a compass. Especially when you're exploring." He looked back at the saleswoman. "You open the case. Get the compass out." The saleswoman looked at the manager, panicked. She didn't know what to do. "Did you hear me?" Keanu asked, his voice mild, but with an edge of steel. "We would like to see the necklace." The manager swallowed hard. He knew he was beaten. If he refused, he would be the villain in a story that would likely be all over the news by tomorrow. A famous actor defending a disabled child against a cruel store manager? It was a PR disaster waiting to happen. He nodded stiffly at the saleswoman. "Do as he says," the manager muttered, unable to make eye contact with Keanu. The saleswoman fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. She unlocked the case and carefully lifted out the black velvet tray containing the silver compass necklace. She placed it on the counter, but she kept her distance. Standing near the register, as if the necklace might bite her, Keanu walked over to the counter. He didn't shoo James away. He waved James forward. "Come here, buddy. Take a look. It's okay now." James walked slowly toward the counter, staying close to Keanu's legs. He looked down at the necklace. It was beautiful, just like he remembered. The silver was polished and shiny, and the compass face had intricate markings on it. It looked like a tool for an adventurer. "It's cool," Keanu said, leaning down beside him. "You know, a compass helps you find your way when you're lost. But you know what the best part is?" James looked up at him. "What?" "The needle always points north," Keanu explained. "No matter which way you turn, or how much you spin around, it remembers where true north is. It stays steady. That's a good thing to be." Suddenly, James felt a massive tick building up in his chest. It was the stress of the situation, the proximity of the saleswoman, and the excitement of the movie star all mixed together. He tried to hold it back, he really did, but it was too strong. Asterisk, bark. The sound exploded from his throat, loud and sharp. The saleswoman flinched again, a reflex she couldn't control. But before she could make a face, Keanu let out a laugh. It was a genuine, hearty chuckle. "See?" Keanu said, looking at the saleswoman with a grin. "He's just enthusiastic. Good lungs, kid." He turned back to James as if nothing had happened. He didn't apologize for the tick. He didn't try to shush James. He treated it as normal as someone sneezing. In that simple action, he did more for James's confidence than any doctor ever could. He stripped the tick of its power. It was just a noise. "It wasn't a crime, so we're taking this," Keanu announced. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "How much is it?" The manager stepped in quickly, eager to get the interaction over with. He named a price that was far too high for a simple silver necklace. Hoping to capitalize on the celebrity sighting, Keanu didn't even blink. He pulled out a stack of bills and counted them out. He placed the money on the glass counter. "Keep the change," he said. "Maybe use it to buy some sensitivity training for your staff." The saleswoman's face burned with shame. She took the money quickly and began to package the necklace in a fancy box. Her hands moved fast, wanting to hide. "And," Keanu added, his voice dropping again, becoming serious. He looked from the saleswoman to the manager. "You owe this mother and son an apology. Right now." A real one. Not sorry for the inconvenience? I mean an apology for being cruel to a child. The store went quiet. The air conditioning seemed to hum louder. The other customers were watching with bated breath. The manager looked like he had swallowed a lemon. His pride was wounded, but he was cornered. He looked at James, who was standing tall next to Keanu, clutching his science ribbon. The manager started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. I apologize. For the misunderstanding? For the harsh words. It wasn't a great apology. It didn't sound entirely sincere, but it didn't matter. James had heard him say it. James H. The heavy glass door swung shut with a soft thud, and the little bell above it chimed one last time, signaling that Keanu had left. The air in the store felt different now. Before, it had been filled with tension, cruelty, and the manager's loud shouting. Now, it was thick with a heavy, awkward silence. The kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they have just witnessed something shameful. James stood near the counter, his hand still clutching the silver compass that now hung around his neck. The metal was warm against his skin, and the weight of it felt grounding, like an anchor holding him steady. He looked down at the shiny surface of the compass, watching the light dance across it. He could see his own reflection looking back at him, a boy with messy hair, red eyes from crying, but also a boy who was standing tall. Alina let out a long, shaky breath that she felt she had been holding in for hours. She wrapped her arm around James's shoulders, pulling him into a tight-side hug. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her grip told him everything. Asterisk, it's over. You are safe. We are okay. Asterisk. The store manager was still standing near the register, but he looked like a completely different man. The arrogance had melted away, replaced by a look of utter defeat. His face was pale, and he was avoiding eye contact with everyone. He stared at the floor, the counter, the glass case, Sunnyware but at James or Alina. He looked smaller now, stripped of his power. The rude saleswoman was busying herself with a cloth, aggressively cleaning a spot on the glass that was already spotless, her face burning bright red with embarrassment. She wouldn't look up either. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant, muffled noise of the mall outside. It was amazing how much the atmosphere had changed in just a few minutes. Earlier, this room had felt like a prison to James. Now, it felt like a room where he had won a battle he didn't even know he was fighting. The other customers in the store, the ones who had stared and whispered earlier, began to move again. But they weren't whispering about the noisy boy anymore. An older woman who had been looking at wedding bands near the window walked over. She was wearing a floral dress and had kind, crinkly eyes. She stopped in front of James and Alina. She didn't say anything to the staff. She looked directly at James and gave him a warm, encouraging smile. That is a very handsome necklace, young man, she said, her voice soft and sincere. You have excellent taste. James looked up, surprised. He expected more judgment, but all he saw was kindness. He managed a small, shy smile. Thank you, he whispered. His voice was a little shaky, but the tick didn't interrupt him this time. The woman nodded at Alina. You have a wonderful son. You should be proud. I am, Alina said, her voice strong and steady. I am very proud. The woman gave a small nod of respect and walked past the counter toward the door. As she passed the manager, she made a point of shaking her head in disappointment. It's a silent gesture that said more than words ever could. The manager shrank back another inch. Another customer. A younger man in a business suit, who had been watching the whole ordeal, spoke up from the other side of the store. You know, he said, addressing the room, but looking at the staff, I was going to buy a watch today. But I think I'll take my business somewhere else. Somewhere that understands how to treat people. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the manager staring at his back with his mouth half open. The silence in the store grew heavier, but for James and Alina, it felt lighter. It felt like justice. Alina looked down at her son. She could feel the tension leaving his small body. His shoulders, which had been hunched up around his ears for the last 20 minutes, finally dropped. He took a deep breath, his first real breath in a long time. He lifted the compass pendant and rubbed his thumb over the glass face of it. "He called me brave," James said quietly, looking up at his mother. His eyes were wide, filled with wonder. "Keanu said I was brave." Alina felt her heart melt. She smoothed his hair back, tucking a stray lock behind his ear. "He was right, James. You are brave. You face things every day that most grown-ups couldn't handle. And today, even when those people were mean, you didn't let them break you. You stayed strong." "I wanted to run away," James admitted. "I felt like I was going to throw up." "I know, baby." "I wanted to run away too," Alina confessed. "But we didn't. We have the necklace, and they are the ones who look foolish." The manager, hearing them speak, finally realized he couldn't just stand there pretending to be invisible. He cleared his throat awkwardly. It was a dry, rasping sound. He stepped out from behind the counter, keeping his distance. He looked like a scolded dog approaching its owner. "Look," he mumbled, staring at a display case instead of at them. About earlier, I didn't know. About the condition." Lena turned to look at him. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked calm, and that calmness was more intimidating than her anger had been. "It doesn't matter if you knew," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet store, everyone could hear her. "You don't need to know a diagnosis to be kind. You don't need to know why someone is acting differently to treat them like a human being. He is a child. He is a customer. That should have been enough." The manager shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. "You're right," he said, so quietly it was almost a whisper. "I was out of line. I hope you enjoy the necklace. It's a fine piece of silver." He turned and quickly walked away, retreating into his back office and closing the door firmly behind him. He couldn't handle the tension anymore. He couldn't face the reality that a movie star had just walked in and destroyed his ego with nothing but kindness and a few well-chosen truths. The saleswoman didn't say anything. She just stood there, looking at her feet. She didn't try to stop them from leaving, and she certainly didn't try to offer them any more help. James looked around the store one last time. It was still a fancy place with marble floors and bright lights, but the magic of the shop was gone for him. He saw it now for what it was, just a room with expensive rocks. The real treasure wasn't in the glass cases. The real treasure was the feeling he had right now, the feeling of being seen and defended by a stranger who had no reason to help them. "Are you ready to go?" Alina asked him gently. James nodded. "Yeah, I'm hungry," Lena laughed, a bright, happy sound that seemed to chase away the last of the gloom in the store. "I bet you are." "Ice cream." "Yes, definitely ice cream," James said, a real grin breaking out across his face. They turned and walked toward the door. As they walked, James felt a strange sensation. Usually when he walked into a quiet place, he felt the pressure building up, the need to be quiet, the fear of making a noise. But now, he didn't feel it. He let out a small tick, a little chirp of his throat. He didn't try to stop it. He didn't apologize for it. He just let it happen, because he knew something now. He knew that if someone had a problem with his tics, that was their problem, not his. And if anyone tried to be mean to him again, he would remember Keanu standing there, calm and strong, blocking the hate like a shield. Alina pushed the heavy glass door open. The cool air of the mall rushed in to meet them, bringing with it the smell of cinnamon pretzels and fresh coffee. It was noisy out. Hear people talking, music playing, footsteps echoing. It was chaotic and busy and alive. Normally, this noise might have overwhelmed James, but today, as he stepped out of the jewelry store, the noise sounded like music. It sounded like freedom. He held his mother's hand, and with his other hand, he fingered the silver compass around his neck. He didn't look back at the store. He didn't look at the staff watching him through the window. He looked forward, toward the food court, toward the rest of his day. They walked away from the cruelty of the last hour and walked back into the real world. A world that could sometimes be harsh as they had just seen, but could also be incredibly beautiful. Because in that same world, there were people like the old lady who smiled at him, and people like Keanu, who would step out of the shadows to remind a little boy that he mattered, as they disappeared into the crowd of the mall. James stood a little taller. He wasn't just the boy with Tourette's anymore. He was James, the boy who had a compass. He was James, the boy who met a hero. And he was James, the boy who knew deep down in his heart that he was exactly who he was supposed to be. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the parking lot as they walked away from the mall. The air was cooling down, but James felt warm inside, a comforting heat that had nothing to do with the weather. The tension that had been knotted in his stomach for hours had finally dissolved, replaced by a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. They stopped at a small ice cream cart parked near the exit of the lot. It was a simple, beat-up metal stand with a colorful umbrella, run by an older man with a kind face and a white apron. In the grand scheme of the day, buying an ice cream wasn't a huge event, but for James, it felt like the most important part. It wasn't about the ice cream itself. It was about doing something normal. It was about ending the day on a note of joy instead of shame. "What flavor do you want, bud?" Alina asked, pulling a few crumpled dollar bills from her purse. "Chocolate, please," James said without hesitation. He looked at the ice cream man and smiled. "Double scoop, if that's okay." The ice cream man chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Double scoop for a champion? Coming right up." He scooped the chocolate ice cream into a waffle cone and handed it to James. As James took it, his hand gave a small involuntary twitch. It was just a tiny jerk of the wrist, the kind of thing that would happen to anyone sometimes, but James froze. He watched the ice cream man closely, waiting for the look of annoyance, waiting for him to pull back, but the man just smiled wider. "Careful there, it's heavy. Enjoy, son." James let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He took a big lick of the cold, sweet ice cream, and the taste exploded on his tongue. It was delicious. It was perfect. They walked toward their car in silence, eating their ice cream. The parking lot was busy, filled with people leaving work and heading to dinner. Car doors slammed, radios played, and people chatted on their phones. It was just the noise of the world. Before today, James might have covered his ears or tried to hide behind his mother. He used to feel like everyone was staring at him, like everyone was judging him, but not today. He walked with his head up. He licked his ice cream and watched the people. If his shoulder twitched, he let it twitch. If he made a small sound, he ignored it. He had the compass hanging around his neck, hidden slightly under his shirt, but he could feel it there. It was his secret armor. They got into the car, and Alina started the engine. The familiar hum of the motor filled the air. She turned to James, her face soft in the fading light. "Are you okay?" she asked. James nodded vigorously. "I'm great." "That was the best ice cream ever," Lena laughed, a sound of pure relief. "It was pretty good." She paused, looking at him closely. "I'm so proud of you, James. Not just for how you handled things in there, but for who you are, because of Keanu," James asked. "Keanu was wonderful," Alina said, putting the car in drive and pulling out onto the main road. "But I'm proud of you because you are brave. You didn't let those people make you feel small. You stood your ground." James looked out the window as the city lights started to blink on. He thought about what had happened. He thought about the angry manager and the scared saleswoman. Then he thought about Keanu. What had Keanu really done? He hadn't fought anyone. He hadn't yelled or screamed. He had just stood there. He had used his presence to protect them. "Mom," James asked after a few minutes of quiet driving. "Yes, sweetie." "Do you think I'll ever meet him again?" Alina glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "I don't know, honey. It's a big city. But even if you don't, you have his gift, and you have his message." James touched the compass through his shirt. Yeah, when they got home, the house was quiet and welcoming. James's dad was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper. When he saw them walk in, he immediately put the paper down and stood up. He could tell something had happened. He saw the tiredness in Elena's eyes, but he also saw the bright spark in James's face. He saw the silver chain glinting around his son's neck. "Hey guys," he said, walking over. "How was the big shopping trip?" Alina looked at James, giving him the floor. It was his story to tell. James took a deep breath. He walked over to the couch and sat down. His dad sat next to him. James told him everything. He told him about the necklace he wanted and how the manager was mean. He described the yelling and the feeling of wanting to disappear. He told him how he felt like an animal in a cage. Then he told him about the door opening. He told him about the man in the leather jacket. He told him how Keanu had stood in front of him like a shield. He told him about the compass and the lesson about north. James's dad listened quietly. At first, his face grew dark and angry when he heard about the manager. He clenched his jaw and his fists balled up. No parent likes to hear that their child has been bullied, especially by an adult who should know better. But as James got to the part about Keanu, his dad's expression softened. He shook his head in amazement. He really did that? His dad asked. He bought the necklace and made them apologize. Yes, James said. He was cool, Dad. Not like movie cool, like human cool. His dad reached out and pulled James into a big hug. I wish I had been there, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I wish I could have seen it. I'm glad you weren't, James mumbled into his dad's shoulder, because then Keanu wouldn't have come in. His dad laughed and pulled back, ruffling James's hair. You're right. It sounds like you had a guardian angel today. James went to bed that night feeling like he was floating. He brushed his teeth and put on his pajamas, but he didn't take off the necklace. He knew the rules usually. You took jewelry off before bed, so it didn't get broken. But tonight, he needed it close. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was dark and quiet. Usually, this was the time when James would worry. He would worry about school tomorrow. He would worry if his tics would be loud in class. He would worry if kids would laugh at him, but as he lay there, he held the compass in his hand. He ran his thumb over the glass face. He remembered Keanu's words, *the needle always points north. It stays steady. James realized that life was going to be like that store sometimes. There were going to be managers who yelled. There were going to be people who didn't understand. There were going to be days when he felt like he didn't fit in. But he also realized that there were people like Keanu. There were people like his mom and dad. There were people like the ice cream man. The bad people in the world didn't win because the good people were stronger. Kindness was stronger than hate. Over the next few weeks, things at school began to change for James. It didn't happen overnight, of course. He still had Tourette's. He still had tics. He still made noises and jerked his shoulders. That didn't go away, but his reaction to it changed. A few days later, during recess, James was playing Foursquare. One of the older boys, a kid who usually teased him, made a loud mocking noise, imitating a tic James had made earlier. Usually, James would have cried or run away. He would have felt that hot burn of shame on his cheeks, but this time James stopped. He stood in the middle of the square. He touched the compass hidden under his shirt. He remembered the jewelry store. He remembered the feeling of standing next to Keanu, feeling tall and important. James looked at the bully. He didn't get mad. He didn't yell. He just smiled a little, shook his head, and said, "That's not really very funny," was a simple sentence. But the confidence behind it was powerful. The bully looked confused. He was expecting James to be scared. When James wasn't scared, the bully lost his power. He shrugged and walked away. James won that day. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. His teacher noticed the change too. When James had a tic during quiet reading time and dropped his book, the whole class looked over. Before, James would have scrambled to pick it up, apologizing to everyone this time. Just picked up his book, took a breath, and kept reading. He acted like it was normal. And because he acted like it was normal, the other kids went back to their reading. They stopped staring. The compass wasn't magic. It didn't stop the tics. It didn't change his brain, but it changed his heart. It reminded him that he was okay exactly as he was. Months later, James saw Keanu Reeves on a poster for a new movie in a bus shelter. He was wearing a suit and looked serious, just like a movie star. James smiled at the poster. He wanted to run up to it and tell everyone, "Hey, I know him. He helped me." But he kept the story close, a special treasure in his heart. The story of the jewelry store became a legend in their family. It wasn't a story about a celebrity. It was a story about the power of dignity. Alina often thought about it when she was feeling down. She thought about how easy it is to be cruel when you are behind a counter or in a position of power. And she thought about how easy it is to be kind, if you just choose to be. The manager at the jewelry store probably forgot about the incident eventually. Or maybe he told the story to others, twisting it to make himself look better. But for James, that day was etched in his soul forever. It was the day he learned that his condition didn't make him less than. It was the day he learned that bravery isn't about not being scared. Bravery is about being scared and standing up anyway. On James's next birthday, he didn't ask for a new video game or a bicycle. He didn't ask for expensive toys. When his mom asked him what he wanted, he just smiled and touched the silver compass around his neck. I have everything I need.